We are excited about our work today. But one of the things that we wanted to start with is sharing our summary of day one takeaways from you. We have two reasons for doing this. One, we want to share with you how similar your feedback is from the feedback that we've been getting across the state. And I think that's great. That means we're all thinking about the same things and see the same areas where we have questions and some needs for continued improvement. But also, I want to make sure that you know we're hearing you and that we are going to do our best to help provide support and resources in these areas where we've identified some specific needs. So the thing that's been most clear, and it's the reason it's the first thing on the list, is alignment with ed. And by the way, the red text is where there were commonalities across the regions, and the black text is what we've added based on our conversation with you yesterday. So you can see this is really, really, really similar. So we know we need alignment with TPA, and Annie and I and Becky and I and lots of folks have talked about the need for this, and it's going to be one of the first things that we are working on. We've got about 3 big priority things that we know are going to be next on the list, and this is one of those things. There's a lot of talk and energy around collaborative program design. At each convening, there have been conversations. I just was talking with Mark about opportunities for EPPs to collaborate among themselves. So a lot of our independent providers in East are getting together and talking about how to do this. I just had a conversation on Tuesday with the providers that work with Shelby County Schools and the fact that they want to get together and work collaboratively because they know Shelby County needs them to do that. And in here, we had a conversation about Metro, and I'm sure there are other opportunities to collaborate. So we'll be thinking about ways the state can support that, but we encourage you to reach out to your colleagues in this room and begin to have those conversations. We also have that on there for another reason, though, and that is collaborative program design with your districts. Really important to continue having those conversations that I know you already have with them about what they need, but making sure that you're having good conversations with them specifically about literacy and specifically about what they are trying to do in literacy. And I was just sharing with Becky something that popped into my mind last night. Maybe it was because I feel like I've been driving so much the past 2 weeks. I was thinking about streets. And I've lived in a couple of cities that were growing, that were experiencing significant population growth. And none of them like Nashville. It's amazing. But something that would happen that I find amusing is new people would come to town and they would say, this town has streets, and the names just change. And why do they change? That doesn't make any sense. Well, of course we all know it's because before the city got that big, those 2 streets probably didn't have a clear connection. And once the city grew and grew and grew and became a main thoroughfare, well, people on that half were used to calling it this thing, and the people on that half were used to calling it something else, and neither one of them was wrong. But when a new person comes to town and you try to tell them where to go, it might be a little bit confusing for them. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do here, and why it's so important to be talking with your districts, is making sure that for our novice educators, that we are just being transparent. It's not saying that any of the terminology is incorrect, but if we give them a clear framework, a roadmap, it's going to be much easier for them to navigate what they need to do in their early years. Integration across non-literacy courses, and even including clinical experiences that might happen in those non-literacy courses are another thing, big topic that's come up, and something that we want to learn more about how you are thinking about doing that on your campuses. Being really careful about assumptions about candidate knowledge, and Annie, help me, I don't remember exactly the detail about what that was about.
It was referenced yesterday too, maybe not in the same way as as that was brought up in West and East, but being careful that we're not making assumptions that candidates come in with a certain skill set or certain knowledge about literacy, but being very explicit in that ask about where are they, what is the foundation, where do we need to go and build from there.
Great. Thank you. We also talked a lot about text sets and text selection and resources. So all of this is great stuff. How do we get the things we need to have both at our ed prep providers as well as in our districts to realize this teaching literacy in Tennessee model? So those are some short-term things that we're going to be working on because we think there are some viable solutions that aren't too far out into the future. There are also some really long-term ideas that have come up using ed prep as experts and resources for our districts. We think there's a lot of opportunity. We ask all the time among ourselves, how long has it been since I've had a chance to actually go into a school and actually teach, maybe not even just observe, but teach a lesson and model something for maybe student teachers or for teachers who are in their early years of teaching. Thinking about partnerships with districts. This is a long-term strategy. Susan Jones is here, and she is our Director of Networks and Partnerships, and many of you might know her through that role, that we're really trying to elevate how we work and collaborate together. We talk about moving from relationships to partnerships, and we had one of our deans who, it was really great. He said, relationships are reactive and partnerships are proactive. And I really, really liked that. That was Austin P. So we were really excited about that. Clinical mentors, we all talked about this. This is a challenge. You had lots of conversation about this yesterday. What happens when they get to a school, they're trying to have a clinical that looks something like, what we've been talking about in here, and the school's just not there. That's not how they're doing this. So that's a challenge. Becky and I had a long conversation about this last night, about how do we move districts and schools and ed prep, forward and closer together all at the same time. And that goes right into our next one, preparation to induction. How do we make sure that we don't think about this as a bifurcated system, that, preparation doesn't fully end when you graduate, and induction doesn't necessarily just start on your first day of teaching. And so we're trying to really build that arc over time and make sure we all have a good sense of how that transition happens or can be best supported for our candidates. And then the last thing, we want to really talk about this. We see this as a paradigm shift. What'd you say?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I want to make sure that when you are thinking about what you're doing well, and you're doing lots of great things well, that you're really taking that moment to be reflective about opportunities to improve and change. This is a great moment in our state for us to work together on this. And while we have done a lot of things, our kids aren't getting the proficiency level results right now that we want them to get. And so really be reflective and take an opportunity to think about how your program can really meet not only that compliance, are you going to do all the standards, but that complex way of teaching literacy that's presented in teaching literacy in Tennessee. So just really be thoughtful about that. We are trying to be thoughtful about that in terms of how we frame our work. So thank you for giving me a moment to just share those reflections with you. I think that they'll continue to shape our conversation throughout the day. Just a quick reminder, our goals, our objectives for this convening are to make sure that we all get a much deeper understanding of teaching literacy in Tennessee and how it aligns with a lot of our other state initiatives, but also to reconsider our programs and think about what changes we might need to make in order to prepare for submitting proposals and understanding what that proposal review process is going to look like next spring. We're going to spend a good bit of the afternoon working on that. Just a quick reminder about our norms. I don't think we had any challenges in this area. I think everybody was engaged and assuming good intentions. Definitely keeping our students in the center of our work. So I'm going to hand it over to Becky here in just a minute, and she's going to continue. This morning will be our big last push related to thinking and learning about teaching literacy in Tennessee explicitly. She'll continue with some unit planning conversation and then move to writing, which is a huge topic that we really haven't touched significantly yet. Then we'll have some roll-alike conversations. These have been really productive. Our early and elementary folks will think really deeply about candidate assessment, and with our deans, we'll talk about some partnership work and clinical mentors and things like that, and about some of the structures that we might need to be working on outside of explicitly related to literacy. We'll also have our special populations group come together, and I think they talk about candidate assessment as well. Is that right? Oh, they're going to talk about the standards. Then we'll have lunch, proposal review process, and then we'll end and that block will include some time for you and your team to begin planning around how you're going to construct your proposal. And then we'll talk about the literacy network at the end of the day.
So excited to continue this journey with you today. Thank you again for taking time out of your day. I know that it's a balancing act, and we appreciate you coming and partnering with us to continue this journey today. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll continue with some really nice conversations today. And just wanted to tell you, we're all going to put our seatbelt on today because we're going to have a lot of information. We'll be using our text as evidence a lot of today, so have that handy and out. And as we go through, we'll look at our pacing and how we're doing. We may not take a complete group break, but feel free as you need. Please take care of your needs and come back and join us. But I wanted to make you aware that depending on how pacing goes, that may not look like a group break today. So let's kind of come back to a review of unit design and recap. So this is going to be a warmer-upper. I'm not sure if all of us have had our caffeine injection yet, but let's kind of think back to unit design. So talk with me about what is on my right and my left. What are some things, just call out with a big voice, what are some things that we know about the standards integration and the student needs? Why are those in the placement that they are? You're like, oh, she's probing thinking really, really deeply pretty early in the morning. So there's intentional placement of both sides of this diagram, or of this visual. Integration of standards and student needs. Why place those there? They connect in the middle. Okay, so trying to show some fluidity, that this isn't just a lockstep process, it's a gritty process, it's meaty, it happens throughout the model, and it all works together.
I was just going to say, regardless of which side you start in, you should end up on the other side as well.
Okay. So there's there's a reciprocity between these elements, and it isn't, there's some recursiveness in the spiral. True. Any other ideas? So what are some takeaways that you're remembering from yesterday about the integration of standards? If you could provide just a nutshell summary. Who might be able to provide a nutshell summary? What are some of the main takeaways? Loud voice. Take a risk, it's okay. We'll all form ideas together. Is the focus on one standard? No, we learned yesterday that there are multiple strands, right? That there's this interwoven tapestry, okay? And we are also trying to connect in the content areas. Isn't necessarily our driver. We're using that as a vehicle for our standards, such as comprehension of informational text. What else? Yes? Okay. So it's really layering these pieces together and trying, it's multidimensional. It's not just one-dimensional. Does that help capture? Okay. And yes, ma'am.
And we don't want to think about
Right, so there's vertical representation. So we are completely clear about what students should have gotten before us and what we need to prepare them to do after us. And that helps our range of learners as well, because let's say I have a student who is a high achiever. I might think about that next couple of grade levels above and think, ooh, how might I challenge you? Or I might think of scaffolds to help students meet that grade level expectation. Thank you. Great thing to bring to the table. All right, so let's then go up to that first part of the spiral, the concepts. So kind of take yourself back to that conceptual hierarchy that Liz shared yesterday. What are some things that are captured in your mind from that piece of learning? So focus in on the concepts and that conceptual hierarchy that Liz shared yesterday, from universal concepts down to disciplinary understandings and those guiding questions. What are some of the things that are popping out with that piece of learning from yesterday? Okay. Right. Okay, so there's a vertical, again, representation, not only of the standards, but these concepts and how they build. So it shouldn't be that we see the same text taught in the same way across grades. There should be some differences that we see. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Please.
Bring all this into the classroom. So your essential questions, your vocabulary, your assessments, all of this is going to work together in this. This is not an isolated piece.
Mm-hmm. So big word here is connection. Connection for students. Yes. So we definitely have an end in mind. We have a concept, we have the enduring understanding, so we know what we're driving toward, and we know that there are essential questions that we're going to grapple with in order to get there. So there's an intentionality in the connectedness of this work. Yes. So we've touched upon the enduring understandings and the essential questions there. Okay. Talk more about that. So not monothematic.
Well, totally borrowing from yesterday's idea. It's not just about apples, right? We have like this big idea, and then we work our way down through it.
Right. So we had a conversation over here earlier that it really, I remember the 90s, and it was like, okay, so it's September, so everybody, it would be against the law not to have apples as the theme, right? Or it's now October, so wouldn't it be against the law not to have bats or pumpkins as the theme? Well, we're past that now, right? So we're past this skimming the surface and trying to make these connections that don't really connect. Don't you remember back in the 90s where we had these webs and we were trying to connect to 100 different content areas, it seemed like, and it really didn't make sense? I don't know how that made sense for our students. We're thinking about going deep, that deep, meaty learning that building schema together, and the value of that long-term for our students, that learning that sticks. So what about the text selection piece? What sticks out to you from yesterday from that piece? Okay. So again, that intentionality is there, and thinking about different texts that I use for different purposes, and we'll continue to talk about that today. But it isn't just choosing a book off the shelf because it's my favorite. There's a reason for every step that I take as an educator in front of students. Yeah, making it make meaning for students. Having that anchor.
Bogged down by this idea of, do I need to go out and purchase a whole bunch of new text? I think it's easy to go in that direction and think, well, do I need to build this huge literacy library? But again, that might not be meaningful for every student. So, someone shared a really nice resource online that I went and looked, just to find some, text for free, different even passages. I really like that, so. That was meaningful for me yesterday.
Yeah, there could be a lot of open source texts out there that we could pull into our unit. It isn't necessarily having to go out and purchase. It could be finding multiple texts and resources to be able to form and build these schema files in the mind.
About the way that my students are K through 12, those students, how they're interacting with language. So again, I'm not just gonna go to like short stories or picture books, but how do sixth graders interact with language? They're probably using some form of technology. Doubt it's Facebook, but there's all different, and I'm thinking about that too. So just how they interact with, it's probably gonna look different than how I interact with some written language, for example. So that's important too, I believe.
Right. Using technology to speak the student's language, like tools such as Padlet. I don't remember if it's Padlet or Poplet. Have you seen Padlet, Poplet? It's kind of like that online electronic poster board where multiple people can post. They're composing. They're thinking through an idea, and it's using technology in a way that's causing them to be able to collaborate and interact together and respond to each other with the different electronic sticky notes that they put in. So really trying to think through ways that articulate, hey, I see you, I see the way that you're learning, and I'd like to jump into that world with you. Yes, ma'am.
I really like that idea. Very intentional about choosing grade level proficiency and then making sure that you're also choosing from another grade band so that they are stretching. I think I usually think about, okay, where are they? What's their proficiency? Let's do that. But then making them stretch really stuck with me yesterday.
Yeah, providing that cognitive stretch. You'll see the words cognitive stretch throughout TLIT, and it really is all about where are you now? It's kind of Vygotsky's work. I mean, preaching to the choir here. It's where are you now, and where do I think that the approximation of where you could be, and how can I get you there from point A to point B? I don't want to stay with you right here. I'm going to stretch you to this next place. Always, whether we're in whole group or small group, I'm trying to think about where kids are and how I'm going to stretch them to the next place, knowing grade level expectations. In being able to talk with Tomlinson a couple of months ago over the summer, did I share that? Gosh, in different locations, I can't remember what I've shared. We were able to speak. Dr. Alves, who was here yesterday, and I were able to sit down, we were able to attend a conference with Dr. Tomlinson for a week over the summer. And one of the things we were able to do is to sit down with her individually and talk about this idea of universal concept and all of this stuff. Boy, it brought out the geek in me. I just loved it. I embrace that label. It's okay. But what she talks about is the fact that sometimes it's human nature as teachers to teach to the middle or teach to the lower level of the range because we think they can't. Yet, what does it communicate when we teach here to everyone at the upper level, that grade level expectation, and then thinking through the scaffolds to be able to get everyone to that space in different ways? So it really spoke to me to hear her speak that we need to have that expectation that students can, and that how might they, not they can't, but how might they, as they walk through this journey with us. And just keeping an eye on that space of when they might be moving into a panic zone, and how I can help navigate that with them. Thank you. So yesterday we did talk about those first 3 elements of unit design, and we're going to walk into the next 3 now. We'll go into end of unit tasks, and then thinking through the lesson sequence and the daily tasks. So let's start to embark upon that journey together with end of unit tasks. So as we think about the end of unit tasks, these are the end in mind. These are where we have those authentic, rigorous opportunities for students to really think about those essential questions, and to think about multiple standards and those experiences, those text experiences, those questions that they've encountered, those daily opportunities that they have been immersed within. And this is when they're able to show what they know with those grade level representations. I'd like you to turn to page 39, please, of TLIT. This is just a quick reading down at the bottom of page 39. Will you all read that bottom section, end of unit tasks, please? And be thinking about what are some of those words that are popping out to you. Starting to see some eyes pop up, some affirmations, some nods after reading that. So what I'd like us to do is keep this in front of you, and I want to share with you an example from our unit starters. Again, this is a 3rd graded example that we're going to continue to use today from yesterday. So as you look at this, and I think it's big enough for everyone to take in, I want you not only to read this, but I want you to think about what you read here from TLIT, and what are some things that are surfacing for you. Okay, so take a moment to read this task, please. End of unit task. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts and have an engaging conversation around this. What are some things that are popping out to you as you think about what you read, as you think about this example? What's stirring in your mind?
One of the things I'm noticing is a direct connection to the unit text. The students really have to provide that evidence there. And another thing that, well, from here, reading actual page 39, the higher order thinking skills, we're definitely here.
Okay, so we're higher order on Bloom's here. Mm-hmm. Right, so, and what I also want to bring to the table, so we have Webb's higher order thinking. How many of you are familiar and share with your candidates Karen Hess's work with her cognitive rigor matrix? Does that ring a bell? Anyone? So let's talk about, and this might be something if to Google if you haven't seen her work before, but what Karen Hess does with her cognitive rigor matrix is she takes Bloom's work with higher level questioning and then takes it and created a matrix with Webb's depth of knowledge. So what happened with that matrix is it creates those types of rigorous tasks for students in the different quadrants. And so if you're in the upper left-hand quadrant of her matrix, we would be on kind of that lower level, that building those building type levels. But then if you're in the lower right-hand quadrant, there are types of tasks that we can provide for students that get them to that upper level thinking space. So bringing back to life Bloom's work here, we see some verbs that really shout higher level thinking. So what are some things that you're seeing? So what are some of those higher level things that students have to do with this task?
Synthesize.
How so?
So they have to put the information together. They're comparing. They're comparing and contrasting in some ways, and so they're having to synthesize that information. For example, what you said yesterday about, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it was you that reported that, but the results from the testing, that students are able to write a summary about each one, but then they're not able to synthesize that information to truly compare and contrast. So I think they're required to do that in this.
So it isn't about regurgitating to the president. It's about providing evidence for what we know and preparing sharing this understanding with the president. We've got to get this right. This is really important work, kids. Yeah. Okay. So we have information being shared. There could be ways where we might nuance this a little bit to get that feeding into argumentative type writing.
We're talking about why the other planets can't support life.
Yeah, so they could dip their toes there too. Yeah. What else?
They really need to analyze the text below to determine which evidence is the strongest evidence. That's what was discussed yesterday about the test, that they could find evidence, but it wasn't necessarily the best evidence. So in this case, they really need to look for what is the best evidence that life can exist on these other planets compared to what we have on Earth. So really analyzing the text, looking at that.
So we're really giving them a frequent playground to try out those skills, right? It isn't just we've gotten to March or April when the test happens and this is a foreign thing. We've had lots of opportunities to use evidence that's common. It's commonly what we do. This is our practice. And we get to fine-tune those skills because, again, every time a student has the opportunity to speak or write, they're giving us formative information. It's not just a test that we give on Friday, these formative assessments. These are these opportunities to take multiple pieces of evidence that students are giving us all the time, and if they're having trouble giving evidence, helping to fine-tune that with them. Thank you.
Have designed for my third grade. Is this something that I could give them ahead of time, or would I just wait to the end of the unit in order for them to have that information?
That's a great question. And I guess it depends on your purpose as a teacher, but what I also think is this isn't a gotcha. And I've been in classrooms where it was a couple, gosh, I lose my months, but it's been about a month ago. I was in a classroom and the students were abuzz because of a project that their teacher had told them, and they were so excited to be able to embark upon that project, and they'd been preparing for that. And so sometimes that can be really motivating and really have students build their confidence that they are going to do this, and this is going to be an exciting thing. They get to make a brief for the president for a third grader. That's a pretty cool thing.
And focus.
Right.
While they're taking it in.
Right.
Taking notes or whatever.
So as a teacher, I can say, wow, now remember, we've been immersed in text, and our job here is that we're going to create a brief for the present. This is a pretty important job. So today, as we're building toward that, we're going to read, we're going to practice, and that's going to get you ready to do that. So it anchors in the learning. Yeah. So I'm a fan of telling them and creating the motivation through it. I guess that's up to debate depending on the purpose and depending on the teachers, how the teacher's negotiating that.
Type of learner that I am, I would want that ahead of time so I can make that my focus, because it's the type of learner I am. And there would be learners like me in the 3rd grade, and then there are other types of learners, but then it would help those learners who want that focus in order to really get the information. So that would just be exciting and keep me focused the entire time so I can get to the bottom of my list.
Right. Might there be reasons why we wouldn't provide that ahead of time? Just pooling expertise?
I'm thinking it's so much like a left rest. That starting with a problem, and then you could get them the resources to use to find the solution. So it could be a whole unit around just that problem.
You had mentioned the purpose, what your purpose is. If you're preparing them for testing, and they have to know what it's like to receive an assignment and be timed to be able to do it with text that they have, maybe in front of them, then that would be a reason not to give it to them in advance. But that's simply for preparation. That's not really your pedagogy. It's just practice.
Right. And kind of bringing in the career clusters and thinking through, even as itty bitties, we're talking about different things that we want to be and how different careers might be using different briefs for different things. So we're preparing them for life, and how this is a simulation for maybe what they're going to experience as grown-ups someday in different careers. So pretty. Yeah, I think, did you have something?
This early on, I could see some of my learners thinking now K through elementary setting, possibly being a little overwhelmed by that, and because it's more of a summative assessment from, I think, this example. So maybe they're not prepared, they don't have the skills just yet to be able to answer that. So that was my kind of critique of why I wouldn't do it at the beginning. Right.
Yeah, so just maybe, hey, I have some really exciting news for you, 3rd grade. We're going to create a brief, and so today we're going to embark upon this journey, and we're going to get to the place where we're all going to create a brief. I'll tell you more about that later. We'll get some more details, but we're going to move toward that direction. So it seems like something that'll be fun and inspiring, but it's, as I say, fun. It's not because it's funsy. It's because it's meaningful. But we're trying to build engagement in the students.
I just want to point out, when we had the conversation earlier about the standards above and below, this is also one of those reasons for knowing that when you use an example like this, you also have to be aware of what's being taught above and below, because I'm thinking as secondary right now, I'm seeing a lot of middle school teachers that wouldn't even approach this level, and so they're teaching below this, so these kids are gearing up, and it's important for us to remember that we have to look at above and below, so everybody's being pushed up.
Right. So understanding your standards and articulating that in the daily experiences and these larger end-of-unit experiences to build them to the place where they can be confident no matter what grade level. Yes.
I kind of see the one where it talks about use information to explain why the others are not suitable for life. I almost wouldn't want that phrase in there because I would want them to discover that and not go in with that preconceived notion of, okay, well, I already know none of these are going to work. So, you know, and maybe just rephrasing that, if any of these are suitable for life as opposed to not. Because you might have those students who are like, well, if we already know it won't work, you know, am I going to find out anything new and exciting? So maybe changing that phrasing for some students might be beneficial.
So what about the power of collaboration around the language? You know, because can you see teams around the table thinking through what this wording will be, what standards are going to be used, how we're going to do this, and then they go through it once and say, I wonder if we could challenge our students more if we... And then having that iteration happen over time. That's the power of collaboration for heads to be around a table thinking about those very things. Thank you for bringing that.
This is more just of a comment. When you were saying how to set it up, I do think it's important for all of our populations to set it up, because I think goal setting is something we need to work on for all of our kids. And in doing so, it may not be something that they can reach right now, but laying that foundation to persevere through something and doing it collaboratively with a group of students within the classroom, possibly.
So habits of mind, persevering through struggle, those soft skills that we are preparing them for in college and career. Because this isn't easy, is it? Now, this has been a bit of a question that we've talked about in the other locations. So when we're talking about this, I just want to pose here that this, and we have Karen back in the back and supports a lot of our RTI work at the department, and so she might want to chime in here. Give a big wave back there, Karen. So as we're thinking about this type of work, and remember that this work is about the range of learners, all students. So this would be something that all students would experience. It's that end in mind, yet we might have to provide some different scaffolds in different ways. Yet we're going to give them the opportunity, and we're going to be thinking about those daily opportunities that we have to watch students to get them to that place. But we're not going to do this work for them. We want to give them the opportunity to show, because we're seeing a lot of teachers doing a lot of the talking, teachers doing a lot of the thinking. But whoever does the work gets the learning. So if I, as a teacher, do a lot of this heavy lifting, I get the learning. But I want my students to get the learning. So how can I always provide that opportunity for them and then step in when I need to with the scaffolds, but take the scaffolds away as soon as they aren't needed anymore? Karen, any other additions you might say to that?
I think everything you said is great.
So here's another piece that I want us to think about with this. So we talked yesterday about skills-based and knowledge-based competencies, and the fact that we have skills such as phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, spelling on that skills-based side, and we have the knowledge-based competencies like the vocabulary and the comprehension on the knowledge-based side. So there's, I think, a lot of clarity around the knowledge-based side, right? I can see us really thinking through and helping students maybe with a rubric. Like these bullets might be turned into a rubric. Teams might consider thinking about that. But it's pretty clear, right? We're giving students what we need from them. It's not a gotcha. But let's talk about the skills-based side. And some of this might be inferred. So what are you thinking the connections might be to the skills-based side? Thinking about phonological awareness and phonics and fluency and spelling. So let's pull some of those things out. And some of them might be inferred. What are you seeing with skills-based here? Okay. So there's writing. So at the word level, there's encoding. So thinking through those spelling patterns, so as a teacher, I can look and see, hey, in my explicit lessons, we've been talking about digraphs and blends, not at third grade. Let me go to the first grade space. We've been talking about digraphs and blends with my first graders. How are those now coming out in the writing in this connected text experience? Susie has it, not seeing it from Sam. So what might I need to do to help Sam get there so that he's applying that skill and seeing how it's used? So thank you. Encoding, thinking through those patterns. What else? Okay, so we're trying to really feed that expressive vocabulary. We've been planting the seeds with the receptive vocabulary. Now we want it to start to come out. And so we're trying to bring, like Beck says, bring those words to life. Help them become more mature language users. Okay? What else? Okay? So being able to think about that sentence composition and how I might switch up the ways I form sentences, kind of like maybe using a text as a mentor text. How did the author do this? Wow, that was cool how the author did this with that propositional phrase. How might we be able to do that in our own writing for sentence fluency? So really spotlighting what authors do and then thinking about how we can do that in our writing. Thank you. So what about phonological awareness and fluency maybe? Oh, preaching to the choir here. I mean, you guys have this that, when they're coupling their segmenting and blending skills with phonics. So they're taking what they're able to do with the auditory manipulation of sounds and then give that letter to sound match as they use their phonics skills with encoding. So that's kind of inherently what they're doing. But what about the fluency? I'm really interested in your thoughts on that.
I want to make sure, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Are you looking for suggestions of ideas that you could take away for fluency? Is that what you're asking?
Thank you for asking that probing question of me. So I'm wondering how fluency might be coming out in a product like this.
Okay, so how they're applying fluency to this.
Yes. Or how might they apply fluency to this?
Apply fluency, I would have them work in partners and I would have them read each other's to them. They could go through, you were talking about phonological awareness, so they could go through and choose onsets and rhymes of their partners or whatever skill they may be working on that week for long E or long A or whatever, but exchange with a partner so you're getting a little bit more collaboration there.
Thank you. Tried to ask that in a way that was open-ended just to be generative. I think it must have come out a little bit murky, so thank you for asking that question. But yeah, it could be that I create an opportunity. We've been working on, expression in our reading, so maybe we'll exchange and we'll talk about maybe some of the elements of fluency and maybe we'll provide feedback to each other. We've been specifically talking about and highlighting expression as well as some of the other elements of fluency, so really listen with your partner about how that's coming out as they're reading their text as you switch.
I don't know if I have anything else to really add to that, because I guess I wasn't sure about your question either, where you were going with that and whether you were referring to reading fluency or writing fluency, and whether or not their levels of fluency, of the individual levels of fluency were what you're thinking about in terms of how they could participate in the activities of the unit. I guess so that's like multi-layered question, but that said, I don't know how to respond.
So let me also, fluency is a challenge for kids, right? So I just want to see, something that stuck out to me too. In addition, I love that different idea, and this is really just an inquiry question. I looked at the word phrases there. So what's the connection with even reading fluency with phrases? If I'm writing in phrases, like Rosinski talks about how students shouldn't be reading at the word level, they should be reading at the phrase level. So if we're asking them to write in phrases, might that help them start to think about phrases in their reading? Or exchange work again, and let's think about maybe how you phrased this and how I might read that in phrases to also help to support that element of fluency.
Now that I think about it, I think I would have them read their own papers to see if they're evaluating their own writing and reading in phrases rather than reading somebody else's. I think I would start with just having them read their own papers first, orally.
Great ideas. I love our time together.
I had a separate but related question. I'm wondering if this is the expectation for our students, our third grade students.
What might the preparation look like for our candidates as we're helping them to be considering these types of end of unit assessments? I just wondered some thoughts on that.
Yes, right over here.
I think they need to experience it first as students, as a participant in this process. What is it like? What skills are you using? What are you utilizing to help you navigate? Now let's work on what do we need to teach to get our students there.
Experiential learning, having that experience through that learning. Mm-hmm.
Use something similar to this, but where I had them think about when they're going for a job interview or talking to a principal, but you could still have this same idea of you have this issue in your class, what strategy or how are you going to approach it, and then be able to back that up. So you could essentially have every single piece of this, but just with content that's related to what you're teaching in your own classroom, and which probably is exactly what she was saying. But having them actually do it, but then think about it in a way as they're preparing for job interviews or, team evaluations or things like that, so that they're able to kind of put all these ideas together.
Yeah, because this takes a lot of sophistication as a teacher to really think through this. So some of that might be us scaffolding our candidates to help to make some of those connections, so they don't go out and miss them when they're on their feet.
I think it's a good example of a writing assignment that spells out
Clear expectations for students and what they are expected to produce. I used to say to my candidates, bad writing assignments yield bad writing and good writing assignments yield good writing. If students don't know exactly what's expected of them, then they're not going to produce what you need or what they need to produce, nor are they going to learn what they need to learn, because they don't know the purpose of what they're writing. And so many times I see writing assignments that my candidates create for lesson plans. Granted, they're in the learning process, but also writing assignments that veteran teachers give their students, and writing assignments we give our students that don't have clear expectations, and students are, of course, they want to know how long does it have to be, but we need to give more specific expectations and the purpose for their writing.
So it's a highly transparent process, and I need to know what I'm going to ask of my students and be crystal clear. And the more clear, maybe the more substance there will be to this task, and that might produce a better product in the end for our students. Thanks. So let's keep stepping forward. I did want to spend some time exploring this and analyzing. This is just one example along the way. So let's move into lesson sequences now. And as we think about the lesson sequence, of course, to get to a task like that, we've already talked about how there are going to have to be incremental experiences that build to that space and that build from unit to unit over time throughout the year, and that build vertically as students go through the grade levels. So we want that level of rigor to be there and to continue to build, and for teachers to be kid watchers, to see the evidence that they're bringing so they can start to help to provide that support along the way as needed. So there are going to be a sequence of text that we're going to use. There are going to be question sequences that we intentionally create. There are going to be daily tasks that will feed our way to the end of unit task, and so that we can get there. And there's going to be an integration of these standards. Remember yesterday the list of standards on the slides that Liz shared? So really understanding as a teacher, I'm going to want them to ask and answer questions. I want them to come up with the main idea and the key details. I want them to compare and contrast. I'm going to have them write and share their informative writing and feed this place of informative writing throughout this unit so they can get to the place where they can do the brief. I'm going to have them talk about things in dialogic conversations that go back and forth. I'm going to have them defend what they're saying through evidence. All of those things are going to come out each day throughout the lesson. So I'd like to take us now to page 40. And on page 40, what we're going to do right now is take in the lesson sequence. And with this page, we're going to take each section by itself. So what standards will be integrated within my lessons? What do my students already know? So you and your partner, right next to you, are going to collaborate on this. So you'll read the first section, and then you're going to turn and do a say something structure. So that just means read the first part, look at each other when you're done reading it, and say something. Say an aha, a connection, whatever's stirring in your mind, say it, okay? Once you've said something, then you're going to go to the next portion. What do my students already know? Look at each other, say something, all right? So let's do that for this page. Lesson sequence. What did your partner say that you might want to bring to the table after that conversation? Judy, I'm so glad to hear you say that because it's come out in every convening we've had, that sometimes our candidates might not be coming to us with the most sophisticated writing skills. So how are we able to then prepare them to be ready to prepare their students? So having that expectation of some of these types of learning experiences really prime the pump for the expectation that we have for you here and what the field has for you once you leave our doors. So writing might be a highlighted focus that we need to have in our programs for our candidates.
I think there's a real opportunity there to think about how you collaborate outside of your school of education. We talked about this in West Tennessee about perhaps having a conversation about having a writing assignment as an admissions component. But that's going to require that you're talking with those folks who are teaching that general education curriculum in their freshman and sophomore years. And then If it's an MAT program, then that means it's an admissions criteria or something like that. But that's a different way of thinking, I think, about than how we're currently doing admissions, because I think that you're hitting the nail on the head, Judy. In order for them to teach this, they have to know how to do it, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they're prepared to teach this. And so one way or another, we're going to have to help them get there.
So I just want to take a little moment to have you analyze the question that I asked you and the way that I asked it, and what value you think that might have for your candidates. What did your partner say that you'd like to bring to the table? What are you thinking? So it prompts the listening. So it prompts that part of the standards that may kind of go to the wayside if we're not careful. What else? Any other thoughts?
Goes to listening, collaboration, and accepting new ideas.
So it's so easy. I want to say my thing. I want to stand on my soapbox. But this makes me really have to think about other people's perspective and first actively listen and paraphrase that thinking and bring it to the table to create a community of learners that respectfully share as part of this. And our candidates may not know how to do that, might not know how to create environments that allow students to have that kind of experience. So as we model that for them, that could help to give them some of those supports embedded in what they experience through their classes when we're together as a community of learners in this college class.
So I also think that from an equity perspective, students who might not be comfortable sharing their idea now have a way of sharing and like kind of reassigning some status to that student as someone who's willing to speak up, but can share somebody else's idea and not have to take ownership of it. So I think it's really important for equity.
Yeah, and we have different personality types. You know, we have people who might fear sharing because maybe they've, had horrible experiences before when they have shared, or maybe they're kind of inhibited learners. And you're right, it helps to give everybody a voice, and it helps us all look out for each other. And we haven't heard from Anna, but I want to share this really cool thing that Anna said. Let me pull that out to the table. What a powerful thing to say, we see you, Anna. You're part of us. All right. So let's think now, as we're thinking about the lesson sequence, about all of these things that we're weaving into our lesson experience within our ELA block. And we had Liz introduce you to this. So let's just do a recap. Please just call out, what are some things that you remember from the elements of the literacy block model from yesterday? Yes, all of the rectangles are the same size. That's purposeful. What else? Call it out loud and proud. Okay, so by skills, okay. So we have the skills-based and the knowledge-based competencies that are coming out in different ways through the standard representation, the strands here. Okay, did I catch that? Okay. Again, it's very difficult to make a 2D model of something that's much more gritty than the ELA. The ELA block is gritty, and there's lots of fluidity to it, and it's not just one right answer. But yes, the arrows are supposed to show that interrelationship that happens between these things in the model. Thank you. What else? Okay, so there are times that we are going to spotlight intentionally and have explicit instruction that happens. We always make that connection back to connected text with reading and writing experiences. So there's intentionality. We'll talk a little bit more about that, especially with the explicit foundational skills instruction with a slide that comes up here next. Yes? it's very difficult to see, but I know that you have this in front of you as well, but and the instructional strategies, like for reading, we have that interactive read aloud, the shared reading, the small group reading, the independent reading, and what are those providing for our students?
Opportunity.
How so?
Well, opportunity to with text and through collaboration are part of those. So.
Right. So different types of opportunities, different levels of support that we provide them through those experiences. Interactive read aloud, there's a specific purpose. There are critical attributes around that. Those of you who have seen the manuals for the coaching network, for each one of these, so the coaching network supports many of the outcomes that are represented on here are shared reading, interactive read aloud, shared reading, small group reading, independent writing conferences, independent reading conferences, and then the writing aspects as well. Interactive speaking and writing is in there as well. So in those manuals, you'll find critical attributes for each one of these. So there are certain characteristics that we're doing. There's, again, the word intentionality with what we're doing and how we're coupling that with text. Interactive read aloud, I know that I'm going to be immersing students in text that they can't experience, they can't read for themselves 1 to 2 grade levels ahead. I'm going to expose them to language structures that they might not experience in text that they can read for themselves. So in each one of these, there are different attributes that we use, that we're trying to pull out. So different levels of support along the reading space and the writing space. And we didn't talk about this yesterday. There's been a little bit of dialogue in the other convenings about the wording, instructional strategies. I see some head nods. Some of you may have heard of this as modes of reading and writing or instructional context of reading and writing. Boy, we had a lot of dialogue with a lot of people about this topic. And we want to be careful that these are like strategies. We could have many strategies that we use as teachers, but this is like bold, capital strategies. So we want to be careful that these don't get mixed with maybe some, somebody in another location said, you can buy those books on Amazon that are 100 different strategies that I could use, but this is more than that.
I did have a question. The small group reading, are you referring to that synonymously with guided reading or not?
It's, we are having a lot of conversations about that right now because it's next fall's convening material. So not completely synonymous terms for us. So sometimes the caution with any label is it conjures up different things for different people. So when we say the terms guided reading, that could mean something different for you and for you and for you and for you. And it can also bring up a positive or a negative context depending on the success of that. So we're being very careful with small group reading, so we're not seeing those definite as synonymous terms, because sometimes guided reading is seen as one specific level, where we're thinking about small group reading as we could use instructional level text or a grade span of text, but we might bring students to the table for different purposes. And the purpose is to cognitively stretch students always. And there could be times that we pull complex text into that, that really stretches students to support the vocabulary instruction or to support them in different ways. So more to come on that, but no, we're not seeing those as complete synonymous terms, and we're working to define in that manual what we're thinking about that. And Vicki, do you have anything else that you might add to that? We're pretty deep in that manual. We've had quite a few hours in that manual so far, but that is one thing that we're trying to really define.
So would you say that guided reading might fall under the umbrella of small group reading at times? Is that
so? Umbrella, it's small group reading for us is more of an umbrella term, and so we could have aspects of guided reading that come in, wise text selection, knowing your students, all those pieces will come in there. Again, Vicki, clarifications?
I think there will be a lot in common with what some people think guided reading is, and there will be a lot in common in
around text. So we're trying to look at it at a very high level, conceptualize what this should include, but I think you'll see connections to other interpretations as well.
Well, and thinking about, you know, representing what happens across the state, we want to make sure, you know, different folks have different resources. They have different ways that they're going to pull kids back to that small group table. So we want to make sure that we're providing different entry points and different ways that small group might happen. All right. So I think we'll go forward from here, but I do want us to experience a little bit deeper aspect of this. And so we just did our Say Something experience. So you're now experts at Say Something, right? Now we're going to apply Say Something with a partner from across the room. So again, we're going to do a hand-up, stand-up, a stand-up, hand-up, pair-up with somebody across the room, not who you were with yesterday, and you have to walk. So we're going to get some steps on our pedometers today, okay? So go across the room, and you'll need to take with you a few things. First of all, you needed to take your text here, your TLIT, and we're going to experience pages 41 through 43 here, okay? So before we get up and move, let me give you what we're going to do when we find our partner. So on page 41, everyone is going to read the question, which instructional strategies will I use? How will I sequence them within the literacy block and the unit? So all of us are going to read that, and we'll say something, okay? Then when you get with your partner, there will be an A partner and a B partner. So you're going to give each other a high five, and you're going to quickly indicate who's A and who's B, okay? And then you're going to take the table, you'll read each row. So we're A-B partners. We both read the row. I'm the A partner, so I'm going to say something. Then we immediately read the second. Gosh, that was on cue. That couldn't have been better. It happens to us all. It's okay. Then we're going to read the second row, and she's the B partner, so she's going to say something. And we're going to keep doing this. But you all know these strategies. So this is just going to be a quick acclimation of common language and maybe even a simulation of what you could do with your candidates to prepare them with base knowledge around these strategies, okay? So because you already have a lot, you have a lot of this information or all of this information in your back pocket, and it's just kind of bringing us all together with common language, keep this activity going because it can go for a long, long, long time, and we have a short, short time. Okay, so it's more of a skim and then say something with your AB partner. Okay? Any clarifications that I could make? Okay, get some steps on your pedometer across and immediately start, and then we'll pull back together. I want us to debrief content and process here. So first of all, as we're thinking about content, so not necessarily debriefing, you know those instructional strategies, but let's think about the lens of your candidates in preparation with these strategies. So what are some thoughts that you're having? Because this was kind of a foundational definition, and it was just a taste. Your candidates might need longer, multiple experiences and exposures and texts and things around this. But how are you? How might we best prepare our candidates to really understand this? This is an anchoring piece of the ELA block. So how are we doing in preparing our candidates to understand what these are, why we use them, and how we use them effectively? What are some thoughts we have around the room about that?
I have to specifically teach the strategy in the classroom setting. The students often share with each other, but then immediately in the field experience, they have to go to the field experience. Sometimes they'll get a chance to observe it in the field experience with the mentor teacher, sometimes not, but then they also have an opportunity to
do it there. Sometimes we videotape and we critique with the read alouds, interactive read alouds. We did just a read aloud and then an interactive read aloud, and then we critique and determine what are the elements that are different, what's the benefit of this over that. So there's a lot of modeling. And again, application in the field, I think, is critically important when you're looking at developing their skills in all of those strategies.
So it's almost theory to scaffolded practice for the candidate. Okay, thank you. What else? Like, don't make eye contact.
We've been doing similar things to what she had mentioned, but just recently, and I think I told Dr. Insana that I've been trying to learn this as I teach it, some of this new stuff, even though a lot of this is what we teach already, but this is just more profound and deeper, and it's just a different way of looking things. But so we've been talking about interactive read alouds and shared reading, and comparing and contrasting them. We did a Venn diagram where we compared and contrast them, but I told them to make the inner circle bigger than the outer circles, because I think that interactive reading and shared reading have more similarities than they do differences. And I did not get to go to their training this summer, and I was telling my colleague over there, and I guess a lot of the EPP don't know about it, because when I mentioned it, they didn't know, but the webinars that you did this summer for classroom teachers on interactive reading and shared reading, we are looking at those in class and talking and using those, as well as the Fountas and Pinnell text, to compare and contrast those. But then we just started talking more about guided reading, and we were going to add that into the comparison. And now I'm confused about what I should talk about with them in terms of guided reading. Some of them are seeing it as traditional, in the traditional sense. Some of them are not seeing it. So I liked the question that she had asked earlier.
And so as supports, as you're deeply exploring this, I just want to again share tn.gov/read to be ready, and TLIT, if you go to educators and down to teaching literacy in Tennessee, we have some webinars that might help to start this conversation around these, and we're continuing to build that information. So we have our summer learning series webinars for interactive read aloud and shared reading that have the PowerPoint, or the recorded webinars, the PowerPoints that are posted there for you. And I mentioned earlier, I'm sorry? Yes, so the activities that we talk about, some different pieces in there, it's all posted. And I did mention earlier, like the coaching network materials. If you go to, again, tn.gov/read to be ready, and the coaches link on the left-hand side, the manuals are posted there as well. So feel free to use those resources with your candidates. We post them for everybody to have access to.
So I would also say, please email us. If you think there's a resource out there and you can't find it, don't give up. Email us and we will get it to you in your hands. The other thing I want to say is that we have something called the EPP update. How many of you have heard of it? If you haven't, our plan is to add you to the EPP update listserv. It is a newsletter that goes out every month. We're doing our best to make it very valuable for you. Tiffany is our EPP update fairy, as we call her in our office. So if you, for some reason, don't want to receive it, please let us know, because we're going to add everybody who's attending these convenings to that list, because that's how you'll find out about things like webinars or training opportunities that we might be offering that are open to ed preps as well as our districts. In addition to that, when we talk about Literacy Network this afternoon, it'd be really important for you guys to think at your institutions about who that person is, because that's going to be another way that we consistently share information, is through that Literacy Network. I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's really important for ed prep providers to know what resources we are delivering to our schools and teachers, so that you can be in the same conversation that they are. So if we aren't delivering on keeping you in the loop, please let us know.
And I just want to say, we have the videos posted on Interactive Read Aloud and Shared Reading, but that doesn't mean that the others aren't important. It just means we're following along with the coaching network and the outcomes that we are really supporting deeply. And so Interactive Read Aloud was fall convening last year, and we have shared reading that was winter convening last year. This last fall was work around the foundational skills. So we'll continue to build. So make sure, as you're using these, and know that you're like, well, where are the other ones? That is why. Is we're building cumulatively over time. So we talked a little bit about content and how to prepare our candidates, but what about this process? So you've seen us have shoulder partners and stand up, hand up, pair up, those kinds of structures. What value does that have for your candidate, if any? Why might you incorporate structures like that in your class for them to experience?
Their elements of collaboration.
Do your candidates come knowing how to collaborate well as a trend? No, not necessarily. So a lot of kind of independent thinkers.
No, I mean, you just have to, it's a modeling process, and when we model it, then when they're in the classroom, they think, oh wait, my instructor at the college did this, I probably can do this too, with third grade.
Right.
So it's just modeling the activity so that you can teach the content.
Yeah. So we just did a shoulder partner activity, candidates. You're going into a first grade next week, and how might you support your students in being able to do that effectively? What might go wrong, and how might we have to navigate this so that students, first graders, 6-year-olds know how to talk to one another? Because you guys know how to talk to one another, but a 6-year-old might not. Or we just did a stand-up, hand-up, pair-up activity here. How might that get 100% or close to of your second graders that you're going to go in and see in 2 weeks? How can you increase that engagement? Because I don't know about you, but in coaching students or coaching teachers, new teachers, especially for a lot of years, what do you think as I go in and have planning conversations or and the classroom observation, the reflective conversation, what is the topic that they want me to collect data on the most usually as a trend? Classroom management and engagement, because that's often what a principal is going to be looking for as well. So if we can help them, they might not inherently know how to create those engagement moments where we get higher level engagement, and so that's something that we might model.
We often have such a wide variety of candidates. People who might be working with kindergartners going up into 5th or 6th grade. A lot of times in class, we do strategy demonstration lessons where they do small groups. They demonstrate a strategy, it's 5 minutes, and then the groups move through. But then we also have conversations, and I've had to learn to be really intentional about how would you modify this to fit the age group that you're working with so that they don't automatically dismiss something that they think is for lower level or upper level. But I think having that intentional conversation about, that just because something doesn't immediately fit in your situation doesn't mean you still can't use pieces or parts of that. And I think that our students they haven't thought about that. They're like, I teach 3rd grade, I don't do that. So trying to make those conversations they can start to see how they can use that, because they can have those same conversations with the teachers in their building.
So sometimes challenging we've always done it this way thought, or I've always seen it this way thought. Yeah, what might be different? So I have a great friend that she's a national speaker, and one of the things that she thinks about as she's creating experiences, and I think about that as a teacher for myself, is because we have a lot of teacher talk that happens, she says 10 and 2 chunk and chew. We might have 10-ish minutes. It doesn't mean that I'm just talking and talking and talking. There's interaction in that 10 minutes. But we all in human nature need opportunities to think about, ponder, and talk with others. So giving 10-ish minutes of meat, and then 2-ish minutes to be able, or more, depending on the process, for people to chew. 10 and 2 chunk and chew. So chunking material in a way and being able to process. Content process, always thinking about what makes sense in those ways. That strike a chord?
No, I was just thinking, we have a class called Effective Collaboration.
I thought you were going to say we have a class called 10 and 2 chunk and chew. What a connection. That's amazing.
It's evolved over time. It was initially
created to work primarily to bridge the communication gap between general education and special education teachers. But it's evolved to where it's really an integral part because various majors are in there. And a great deal of focus is on social and emotional learning, development of dispositions of candidates going into the teaching field. It's a 300-400 level class, but it really has become a kind of a pivotal piece because so much of the way that we teach now has changed, and you are much more collaborative. There's a lot of time spent on norming and group dynamics and just sampling of realistic or authentic tasks that you have as a teacher, and how much collaboration is required just among team members. It doesn't necessarily mean that you represent different disciplines. So it's really it's become almost a science in and of itself. So.
There is so much of an art and science to this work, and being able to navigate it in nuanced ways. Yes, thank you. All right. So let's continue forward. So as we think about the elements of the literacy block, I want to bring back to the table skills-based and knowledge-based competencies and the equal role that those play in the experience for our early elementary students. So we're not putting all of our eggs in either basket. We know that both are extremely important. So talked pretty deeply about this yesterday. Any questions or connections that we want to make before we step on? Yes, ma'am.
This reminds me of EdTPA and where they have to choose their comprehending or composing and their requisite skills. So to me, this is highly connected to EdTPA.
Any others with that connection? So she's making the connection between EdTPA and how this is really reflective of that. You want to say that again, or I want to make sure that I caught.
Sure. So it reminds me of in EdTPA for literacy, in the literacy handbook, they're required to choose either comprehending or composing, for those, you all know that work with EdTPA. And then they have to also align their comprehension or composing, whichever they choose, with the requisite skills. This really reminds me of that piece of that.
Thank you. All right, any other things here? Okay. I'd like you to take in this quote from Fountas and Pinnell and what pops out to you. So what is resonating here? So our foundational skills are in service of this larger picture of making meaning of text, of being able to express ourselves and our ideas effectively.
What struck me is it's the intentionality with which we begin has to become internalization on the part of the student so that this can happen.
So we have to have automaticity with these skills for them to play out with automaticity in their reading and writing. We have to have, those have to be really solidified.
We work with intentionality so that we can address all these skills. But the end goal is that the student is able to internalize these processes, these skills, so that they can read and write with competence and ease.
So, that wasn't that just a beautiful way to articulate that? You all hear? Did you all hear that? Oh, we've got to get you on a mic for that. Can you like rewind the tape and say that again?
Right. We start with intentionality and teaching very intentionally all of these skills. But the end goal is that the student has to be able to internalize these skills so that, as it's pointed out here, that they are able to read and write with competence and ease.
Beautiful. Yeah. So we do a lot of work with the scope and sequence, the intentionality. I don't want any mistake here. We're not talking about just incidental learning. We're talking about really having that scope and sequence, knowing how to explicitly teach, and we're trying to get that vehicle of reading and writing so there's automaticity and fluidity, and just these skills all come together and it works to make meaning. Said it more beautifully. I love that articulation of it.
I just wanted to then go further back to our teacher candidates, because the purpose with how we teach them to be doggedly persistent about the foundational piece, because I think of it like when you're shooting an arrow and you know where you want to, you have your bow and arrow and you want the arrow to go there, but you have to pull it in the opposite direction. So for our teacher candidates, it often feels like they're wasting time because they can't get to the goal. But all of those foundational pieces are so crucial, and to slow them down and to say you must do this piece so that this wasting time makes your arrow go straighter and further than if you ran all the way over there with it. And yet it's such a hard thing for them to be patient about that and to really learn it well themselves and then to work with their students that way.
So it really brings to mind that idea that we have to know, for instance, continuums. So we have to know how these skills work, like phonological awareness and phonics. There are continuums that we have with our scope and sequence. So we have to know those. We have to know where our students are along those continuums. So assessments and information that we gather from our students really matters so that we can continue to progress them along that laser focus, having a place where we know we're trying to get to as a target. Powerful information, and it almost feeds our next graphic that I want to pull us back to. So thank you, sister, for pulling us back here. That was a great segue, great wavelength. I want to take us back to where we were here, and Liz talked about this, and how our explicit and systematic foundational skills instruction is housed within this whole model, okay? So we can't lose that as we go here and we have the foundational skills. So this is just how this kind of is lined out a little bit more through that model. So it isn't necessarily seen on the model, but kind of think about clicking a link and this kind of falls down, okay? It's part of the model. So as we have that, I love how you said, I think it was dogged focus. Did I quote that correctly?
Doggedly persistent about teaching the foundation.
Yes, thank you. I did not quote it well. Thank you. You quoted yourself very well. So having that focus and knowing with my scope and sequence where I'm going, and that there's going to be a spotlight that I have, but I'm always trying to get to that place where I'm connecting back to that connected reading and writing experience. So let me just explain this a little bit more. And let's say the topic is, let's say it's digraphs and blends. Let's go back there. Okay? So I know in first grade, let's say, let me go back, could be kind of in a kindergarten space as well. I know in my grade level scope and sequence that the next thing for a guaranteed and viable curriculum for all of my students in Tier 1, that I need to be explicit in my instruction of digraphs and blends. That's in my district. I know that needs to come up for all of my students. And of course, I'm going to monitor them and see kind of how they do with this after the sequence of lessons. But I'm going to be explicit with this. Now, let me talk about that word explicit, because your candidates, how many of them come in knowing what explicit means? Working with a lot of new teachers, they'll say, oh, it's detailed. I'm thinking about Pearson and Dole's model here. Declarative, procedural, conditional, telling kids what they're going to learn, when they're going to learn it, and, what they're going to learn, how they're going to learn, and when and why. So that's just great teaching, right? That's just strong pedagogy. It's not just with foundational skills. So with digraphs and blends, I'm going to have a mini lesson where I'm going to be incredibly explicit, and that systematic, that orderly component that underlies this comes from my scope and sequence. So digraphs and blends come up. I provide a mini lesson for my students. So there's a vivid think aloud. I'm going to show how the skill works. I'm going to, if I need to, if I have it, there could be, a character, there could be an action, there could be a song, depending on what my program has or how my instruction looks here. I might even have to have my students feel how the sound feels as they navigate through this, as I navigate through this mini lesson with them. So I'm really trying to help them interact with this. Then I want them to have these opportunities for application that get them using this. Hashtag not worksheets. I think that one was a whoo! We all get that, right? So we're talking about things like Cunningham's Making Words, Barron and Vernese word sorts, Elkonin boxes, those kinds of experiences that get kids really into manipulating, in this example, how digraphs and blends work. So then I'm going to have them, after those engaging activities, come back together and share their thinking. Share what they learned. Well, all of the digraphs have H that we experienced today. And wow, when those two letters came together, they made different sounds. Talk to your partner about how that worked. So it's really kind of having them articulate so they can start to take this on. As we go back, let me go down here first, this intermediary link to controlled text. So what we're meaning here is decodable text or repetitive text. So we put this in this space because after the share there could be two options that we choose. We could need a little bit more of a controlled text to get students to apply their learning. So with the digraph and blend, I might choose a very controlled text that has strong representation of digraphs to get kids to really start to take on that learning. Or maybe I'm doing a Mrs. Wishy-Washy, and we have wiki sticks. Is that what those things are called? Those gooey little movable things where kids come up and they circle with the wiki stick the SH and how it works in text. So kind of brings to mind, this idea of synthetic or analytic phonics instruction, Mustafa's analytic phonics instruction, where we pull in, it doesn't mean that this has to be completely absent of text. It's a spotlight here. So some of our students might not need this. They may be past this. Some of our students, might have the digraph and blend, so we may be able to get them here. It's knowing our students that matters here. So, but this is where the rubber meets the road. We've got to get them to the place that they can experience that digraph and blend in a shared reading experience or a small group reading, a text that they're reading around the kidney table, or they're writing those digraphs and blends, We've got to get them to a place that they can do that, and they can see how this works outside just the word level. So tell me about what you're thinking about with your candidates here. How does this translate into experiences that are different than what I experienced coming out? I was in a district and we had a Sadler phonics book. Hated that book because most of my students raced past it, and the hardest thing was tearing out those doggone perforated pages and the run that I had on the tape. So how do we help candidates know what quality instruction looks like in this area? How do we prepare them?
I think I have a teacher voice, but maybe not. I said I really like this slide because it's kind of a formula to high quality teaching. And so I think as instructors, we have to model this. And students, our pre-service teachers actually have to demonstrate some of these things so they then can go and replicate with students in the field.
And I want to say, with a graphic like this, there's conversation we can have about different places of this, but what we have found, because again, it's a 2D model for something that is more challenging than 2D. What we're finding, though, it is helping to equip teachers across the state with more of an understanding of what we do other than providing a closed-ended worksheet, to provide alternatives. Thank you.
I wonder too how this would map on to what you've been saying repeatedly about scope and sequence of those foundational skills. So how we're preparing candidates in that regard and thinking about scope and sequence across several months or across the course of the year, and then using this to be thinking about that process mapped on to the scope and sequence. So I wonder how others are even considering that scope and sequence of foundational skills and how they're thinking about the preparation of candidates in that regard.
I'm wondering if the way that this graphic is set up, it implies that foundational skills have to come, like it's a hierarchy, like you don't learn any foundational skills through the other parts, like you have to have those before you can go on to it. Like, is that an implication of this? I don't know, I'm not, as I said, not the literacy
Talk a little bit more
person.
about that so I can grasp what you're saying.
So as I look at the graphic, it's like, oh, we can't even get to the out of text or in-text teaching until we make sure we have all the foundational skills. But I feel like a lot of those skills also are further developed through all of the other parts of the graphic. And it just might be, as how I'm seeing this, as linear rather than some sort of more circular thing. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering how it gets interpreted.
So I think it's how we articulate and how we carry out that guaranteed viable curriculum to make sure everybody does get this. So yes, I think that there is some kind of back and forth interplay with this, and I think it's ensuring that what is the way that is getting your students an internalization of being able to use these skills. So, and Vicki, I'd really be interested in she's a real champion and articulates this beautifully. She just challenges and makes the synopsis fly for me, so.
Well, I actually think there is a problem with the way we depicted this a bit. I've been thinking about the very same thing that you just mentioned. Because the way it's set up here, it does seem as though you could have foundational skills taught on their own and then taken back to the text. Liz said something yesterday, and so did Becky. She said this is the spotlight, so we're drawing attention to foundational skills within the block. But those same sounds, words come up during the interactive read aloud, during shared reading, so it goes back and forth. And when you bring a group to this mini lesson, it's quite appropriate to say, remember those words in the kapok tree that had the double E sound? Now we're going to really focus on that double E sound. So we're constantly going back and forth to make those connections, but drawing attention to that very explicit teaching.
There's benefit in a graphic like this, kind of getting a common understanding, but there's a drawback in folks thinking it's very lockstep linear and doesn't have the fluidity.
Yeah, and the other thing about scope and sequence, so I keep worrying about a few things. Scope and sequence is something
that worries me a bit as well when we talk about this, because we do expect students to achieve grade level expectations, and that scope and sequence helps us understand what is expected in a developmental process. However, we have to think of our students and where they are in that developmental process, and there actually is no research that says you teach a P before an S or a digraph before a blend. So there are developmental changes. You teach single consonants before blends and digraphs, et cetera, but we can adjust, we can go out of order in terms of which consonants, which vowel, et cetera, depending upon our students. So factoring in that assessment information is really important to this process.
Definitely. So knowing that guaranteed viable curriculum for all, and then being able to see where students are and helping to support them in their growing sophistication of these skills. Yeah, but also having that teacher knowledge, like thinking about phonological awareness, that I want to get my students, not just segmenting and blending with sounds, but through the visual component as well. So I need knowing that I want to have a vowel pretty quickly so that we can segment and blend, but the sequence of the letters and things, and just kind of understanding that trajectory. And the standards do give a broad view of that grade level representation of how that should look. But there are more specific scope and sequences that districts have. Any other closing thoughts here before we step on? All right. So there are different questions that we ask in order to make sure that all of our strands come to life. So as you're thinking about your candidates, these might be questions to pose for them. How are connections being made with out-of-text and in-text teaching of foundational skills? How are you thinking about articulating that in the classroom? How are the texts sequenced to build knowledge as we bring back in those knowledge-based competencies, as we bring kids back to in-text teaching? And thinking about how the questions are sequenced. So I again want to put our place again where we are in the unit design framework. We're in lesson sequence here. So in lesson sequence, we're thinking about how these questions are sequenced. So let's just hang our hat here for just a little bit and think about question sequences on page 46. Again, just kind of an independent skim on page 46. Take a second to quickly skim that. It's mostly for you to kind of have that as a placeholder if your candidates might need this space. A few eyes popping up. So as we think about question sequences, we might prompt our candidates to really think about these questions as examples as they're constructing learning opportunities for students. One might be, how does the question sequence support students in accessing the text and developing the desired understandings? How does the question sequence attend to words, phrases, and sentences that will support students in building language and knowledge? So knowing that breakdowns can happen at the word level, phrase level, sentence level, full text level, how are you really thinking about those experiences for your students so that so you can proactively engage them in ways that might thwart that from happening. How are the questions sequenced to deepen students' understanding and further prepare them with success on the daily task? So in the unit starter example, just want to kind of touch, here's what you'll see as you download these. There are texts that are sequenced, and then the creators of these developed the question sequences, and what might be the essence of a response that we might be looking for from a student. Now, are we, as a teacher in front, saying, this is it, this is the right answer? No, it's just framing, this is the essence of what we're trying to get at here, and how that connects back to the disciplinary learning that we want, or the enduring understanding. So it just kind of gives a teacher what they're wanting to get to come out as they scaffold thinking on the fly.
I'm just making a connection with EdTPA here and thinking about the expectation there when the candidates are writing the series of 3 to 5 lesson plans, and the expectation of building the lessons on each other and then referring it back to that central focus. So I feel like this is a really nice way of thinking about that.
Super connection. Thank you, Annie. That help? All right, so the questions that we have are promoting that experience for them, or providing that experience for them to be immersed in the daily task. So not going to stick here very long. These daily tasks we know will incrementally build students to that end of unit task. They have an integration of the strands again, and they're an accumulation of these text experiences that we have. So as I say that, I see one text on this slide, but I want you to visualize the texts that have come up to this space that I can draw upon as a student when I'm immersed in this daily task. So take a moment and think not only about the end of unit task that we talked about earlier, but think about this as a segment of time, a daily task that now my students will experience in 3rd grade. What's coming out? Thank you.
Well, as I look at this, and this is considered a daily task, it's just like anything we do day after day. It's like when you first learn to ride a bicycle, it's kind of hard to do, and you fall down and you get back up and you try it again, but in a while you're a pro. And so when we ask our students to do these things daily, they become really good at them.
So it's not so foreign anymore. This may feel foreign right now out in our classrooms, right? Would you say in the classrooms you experience, could this feel foreign in some places? But after a while, it won't feel that way. That's the hope. What else?
I look at this too as it's essentially what they're going to be doing, but it's smaller scope. So it builds, kind of going along with that, it builds that confidence, but it's also you're seeing where might the barriers be now, that formative assessment, before we get to that final project or product that we're aiming for.
So I'm so glad to hear you say that, because this is the place where we can really kind of, it's that place where we have great formative information from our students, and we can provide some navigation of scaffolds so that when we get to the end of unit task, hopefully we've been able to take some of those scaffolds away and help students just purely navigate that experience without us having to intervene. If interventions happen, it's very minimal amount, that we can get a pure picture of what a student can do.
I just had a comment, but I really like this prompt because it's organized really well, and it helps, I think if the question and the prompt's organized well, it helps students think through what details they need to provide. So I can see a really nice rubric to match some of this coming out of it. So expectations very clear. There's also some higher order kind of thinking words and verbs I see in here, which is really nice for students as well. But I noticed that about a few prompts today, that they're very explicit. And I think that's great for students. And I think about now connecting it to being an instructor. How do I help my teacher candidates craft prompts like this? So it's really making that connection. I think, again, modeling, giving lots of good examples like this helps, but we'll see. Okay.
And peer feedback. Let's create and then let's share, and what feedback, what constructive feedback would you provide? So maybe even, I'm just brainstorming the technology piece, if we have some online, we create and then we respond to each other and we craft collaboratively together, maybe. A Moodle or a...
Thinking like discussion boards are great for these activities. They're, students love them, so.
So the clarity is there for students. For our candidates, opportunities for collaboration. What else?
I think the assignment is so interesting because you're not summarizing. You're looking at, they're not summarizing. They're going to have to do some real understanding, comprehension, and then they're going to have to think about new understandings. That's way outside their box. So it's a really complex assignment.
Right. So as we think about how these are sequenced, again, we have different texts, we have different purposes. These opportunities that we have for students are sequenced in a way that builds, and we gain information from students over time, incrementally building. That sounds duplicative of this spiral of thinking that we've had.